inshallah, instead of usually talking about the definition and the tafsir of verses in order from Surah Al-Fatiha to Surah Al-Baqarah, but instead today we will continue. Today we will continue with verses that look similar to each other, have similar meaning to each other, and we will explain the brief difference between each one of them if they were used multiple times. The verse that we were going to talk about today specifically says, وَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. The brief translation of this means, and then they met each other in confusion. Like if two groups meet each other, in this situation as if two groups met each other in confusion, like I'm not expecting to see you here, or I'm not expecting to see this happening. This ayah was used in the Quran multiple times, but the ayah started in different ways. For example, and then they met each other in confusion. Then they met each other in confusion. And afterwards they met each other in confusion. We will just explain that brief difference between each verse, inshallah. The first one that I explained, that I talked about, and they met each other in confusion, was used in Surah Al-Safat and in Surah Al-Tur. And in Surah Al-Safat, it came starting with the fa, فَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ, basically meaning that it happened immediately. Immediately afterwards, they met each other in confusion. Surah Al-Qalam, a different ayah, but it has similar meaning. And when they met each other, they started, and even though the meaning of each verse is really similar, but the context is different between one another depending on what surah they were in. For example, in Surah Al-Safat, and then they met each other in confusion, this verse talks about when, at the Day of Judgment, the disbelievers are going to meet each other in confusion and are going to start blaming each other and throwing guilt on each other, basically saying, you're the one that made me kafir, you're the one that convinced me. And the others will respond to them, no, you were already a kafir, I haven't convinced you in anything, I didn't do anything here. They will start throwing guilt on each other and blaming each other for what each group did, basically. They're going to meet each other in confusion. And even if context varies, that idea of throwing guilt, that the kuffar blamed a different group for what the sins they did, was used multiple times in the Quran. For example, in Surah Ibrahim, it does the comparison between as there is a weak group like followers and a strong and powerful group, the ones being followed. The weak ones will talk to the strong ones that they followed, telling them, you're the one that convinced us to be kuffar. Are you now going to protect us or help us to get out of what we're in right now? Talking about the hellfire. And they're going to say, no, we're both in it now. And in a different surah, they're going to say, we're both in it anyways. Whether we stress it out or whatever, or even if we fear it now, it's not going to help. We're going to be ultimately here for the rest of eternity. And whether if the context varies or the verse itself used varies in meaning, the idea is the same. They start blaming each other for the sins that they did, like I do a sin, but I start blaming you for it because, I don't know, maybe you talked about it once, so I say you convinced me to do it. They're going to throw blame on each other and throw guilt on each other for what each person did. And that idea of guilting the other side, of throwing blame on the other side, happens multiple times. In another context in the Quran, they will ask Allah, even though they don't know the ones that made them kuffar, they will ask Allah and say, we want to know who convinced us to be kuffar. We want to know who guided us in this disbelief. We want them to be lower than us in what we're in right now. Increase punishment for them. Whatever the situation that they're in, whether they know who the person that guided them or they don't know it, they're going to blame each other for the sins that they did. And in Surah Al-Ahzab, it's put in a different context. It's basically the weak know who are the people that guided them in disbelief and the ones that convinced them to be disbelievers. And they're going to ask Allah, these are the ones that guided us. These are the ones that convinced us to be disbelievers. These are the ones that convinced us to not follow your faith. Can you please double the punishment for them and not have any mercy on them? Could you please curse them? And in the context of Islam, when Allah curses someone, it basically means that Allah is not going to have any mercy on them anymore. They're out of His mercy. They're not loved by Allah anymore. They're hated by Him. So what they're asking for here, please double the punishment for them and don't have any mercy on them. These are the ones that guided us in disbelief. And in Surah Al-A'raf, they say basically the exact same thing, but the response that Allah gives them is that each one of you, whether you were the ones that following or the ones that convinced others to be in disbelief, both of you are going to have double the punishment. Because in one group, just blindly followed the other, and one group made people disbelieve in Allah and made people get away from Allah Azza wa Jal. Both are getting double punishment and both deserve it. And in Surah Al-Zukhruf, Allah explains the situation between them at the Day of Judgment. Whether they were siblings, whether they were friends, they will start blaming each other for what the sins they were did. Let's say me and you are siblings, I did a really bad sin. And the Day of Judgment, I'm going to start blaming it on you for whatever reason. If they were good friends, they're going to start blaming each other for the sins that they did. Every person is gonna feel like the person they were close to, whether it's like a family member, a relative, or a friend, is now their enemy. They're gonna blame anything on them. Everyone wants lower punishment now. Everyone is gonna act like that except for the righteous, except for the good. And in the Day of Judgment, when each person blaming the other comes to Allah, they will start blaming the other, and both are cursed by Allah. Both are out of His mercy. Both will be punished anyway. There is no reason for them to be blaming the other, because the punishment is already set for them. Their fate has been already chosen. What they're doing is not going to fix anything at all. And even if the context varies in the ayah, وَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ, starting with the word with, or and then they start meeting each other and talking to each other in confusion. The context varies in each place in the Quran that it's used in. In Surah Al-Safat, as we just explained, it's about disbelievers blaming other people for the sins that they did. But in Surah Al-Tur, it's the exact opposite thing. It's the believers in Allah, the good Muslims, basically talking to each other, discussing what they were doing in the dunya, discussing how they reached the place that they are in right now. Entirely different context, even if the same used is the exact same verse. And in Surah Al-Safat, again, as we just explained, the verse says, and they met each other in confusion, starting with the wa. وَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ. A similar verse used, but starting with the letter F, saying basically, and then immediately they went and met each other in confusion. An entire different context for this one, it is the believers in Allah meeting each other, discussing how they reached the place that they are in right now. The first time that it was used in Surah Al-Safat, it's discussing what the talk that the disbelievers are going to have against each other, how they will blame each other for sins. And then afterwards, the Quran uses the exact same verse but to explain a different context on the whole other side, in heaven, how the believers are discussing with each other how they were living in the dunya, how they were living in this world, and how they reached the place that they are in right now. And this example that we're explaining right now in the Quran, as when a similar verse is used, maybe the exact same verse is used twice, but behind them is entirely different context. In Surah Al-Safat, when it was first used to discuss what the disbelievers, how they were blaming each other, and then used to explain how the believers in Allah are going to talk to each other, just enjoying their time, talking about how they lived in this world and how they reached the place that they are in right now. Even if the verse is similar, the Quran may use it for a different context, and that's why the tafsir is important. Because if you just read it, you're going to think that it just has the same exact meaning. But the meaning and the context for them, and the definitions for them, are entirely opposite of each other. Ones are getting punished and are blaming each other for the sins that they did, and others are just laughing, enjoying their time, talking to their friends and family and relatives, discussing how they reached heaven, how they were living in this dunya, and maybe some struggles that they faced with it. In this scenario, the exact same verse poses, but in a different context. Both scenarios, whether it's disbelievers blaming each other for their sins, or believers just enjoying their time with their loved ones, both scenarios are even going to get even worse, or are going to get really improved by something that Allah is going to do. At the end of time, not at the end of time, at the Day of Judgment, after everyone has been judged and everyone has been assigned their faith, you're going to hell, you're going to heaven, you're going to the highest place in heaven, you're going in paradise, you're going to the lowest place in hell. Allah is going to symbolize death as, or is going to embody it as a goat. And He's going to slaughter that goat in front of everyone. In front of the people in hell and in front of the people in heaven. He's going to tell the people in hell that they now have eternal punishment. They're not going to get out of hell anymore. And he's gonna look at the people in heaven and in paradise, basically gonna tell them, enjoy for eternity. You're now in heaven and you're not getting out of it and you're not gonna die. What this scenario now poses that death is not a thing anymore. Death is not an active concept anymore. You have two people blaming each other for millions or billions of years for one sin they both did, or two people doing just enjoying their time with their friends for eternity, for billions of years. This situation is going to get even worse for the disbelievers after death has been removed as an active concept, and it's going to get way improved for the believers. And at the day of judgment, after death has been removed as an active concept, and now everyone is assigned their faith, you're going to realize that now roles are flipped between the disbelievers and the believers. In this dunya, in this world, what you usually see is disbelievers making fun of believers. These guys don't drink. How do they enjoy their time? Do they party at all? Are they allowed to do anything? Every time I ask them about something, they say, no, we're not allowed to do that. Are they allowed to do anything at all? And you see disbelievers making fun of believers for their belief in Allah, for what they do. They're laughing at the believers. They may be making it a hard time for the believers to actually exercise their belief. These roles are going to be flipped in the day of judgment. Now, a group being punished in hell, and now there is a group just enjoying their time in heaven. A small window is going to open from heaven, showing how the disbelievers are now getting tortured. A group of people are going to go to that window and are going to watch, yeah, this person used to push me away from my religion. They used to push me away from the way of Allah. Now they're getting punished for it. This guy used to make it tough for me to go to prayer or try to convince me that Islam is a false religion. Now he's getting punished for it. The roles are going to flip, and you're going to see that the believers are now finally happy that their belief paid off. And you're going to see that the disbelievers are now getting punished in regret. Whether the difference in the context is posed in the Quran, whether it's disbelievers talking with each other or believers talking among each other, just enjoying their time, the Quran does not mention who's the one questioning or who's the one confused every time. Because in the setting or in the context of the disbelievers, it's kind of obvious. It's the weak group that were following the strong and powerful ones in their disbelief. Whether they were actually convinced by it or not, or they were just blindly following, they are the ones here who are at confusion because they're getting punished for something that others convinced them to do, or were pushed to them by others. It is pretty obvious in some of the context because it's explained by other verses. So when Allah uses the verse, وَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَسَاءَلُونَ, this exact verse doesn't say, this verse in specific doesn't say who's the one in confusion or who's the one questioning the other. Because verses afterwards explain, it is the weak talking to the powerful ones that convince them about disbelieving in Allah. It is pretty obvious. But between the believers in heaven, when they're just enjoying their time talking to each other, the Quran doesn't say who's the one talking or who's the one questioning the other in this context, except for one. It only mentions the person talking once, and it says that a believer in heaven is going to say basically, I had this soulmate who was trying to get me into disbelieving in Allah. And the way that the Quran said this soulmate or this guy was trying to push the believer into disbelief, and it says, And this soulmate basically tells him, are you from these who believe from Allah, in Allah? Are you among these believers? As if this soulmate is already sure this guy believes in Allah. Because if it was used in a different way, it would have been used as like, I'm just questioning him. Does he actually believe or not? But in this context, this soulmate is sure that this believer has actually a really strong belief in Allah, but was trying to get them into disbelieving anyways. And as we explained, in one context, it's disbelievers talking to each other, blaming each other, and believers talking to each other. There is a context where there is a disbeliever talking to a believer. In this context, the disbeliever is asking the person that believes in Allah, the mu'min, do you really believe that after we are dead and our corpses have already rotted and we're now just raw bones underground, do you think that we will be reconstructed back and there's anything such as life after death? And the answer is yeah, this happens. You die, then your body gets reconstructed by Allah, then you go to hell. It is as simple as that. It is one context where the disbeliever is questioning what the believer is saying. Do you think after we will die, we will be reconstructed and we will be held accountable for what we did before? Do you believe in anything such as life after death? No, that's not possible. And in the story that we just said, in this context specifically where this believer is questioning a believer, it is said in the Quran as like a storytelling time, as a narration basically. The context on the other side, afterwards, a believer is talking to other believers in heaven, just enjoying their time, and he mentions a story. He used to be that disbeliever who was questioning my belief and he was trying to get me out of Islam, basically as a narration. And after he says the story and goes on about it and says, how about we see where he's actually now? A window opens up in heaven and they see that he's now getting punished in hellfire. And when the Quran says a story like this, it doesn't mean that one believer is going to say that to his friend or to his family. It basically says that this is going to happen often between believers and each other, because they're going to start telling each other about stories that they had or struggles that they had in the dunya before they reached this place. They're going to talk about people that were trying to push them out of the way of Allah. And they're going to talk about people that made it tougher, made it harder for them to believe in Allah. And they're going to see where they are right now. All of them are getting punished in hell. All of them are regretting what they did right now. And that believer is going to say, if I actually listened to him, I would have been in the same exact place right now, regretting that I listened to him. He's going to be regretting that he convinced me, and I'm going to be regretting that I actually listened to him at all. And this was just the quick summary of, even if the exact same verse is used multiple times, it has entirely different contexts. It's the difference between it is disbelievers blaming each other for sins that they did, ones regretting that they convinced other people about disbelieving in Allah, and others regretting that they listened in the first place. And in the other context, in the whole opposition, in heaven, it is just believers enjoying their time with their family and friends, talking about struggles that they had in the dunya and how they reached their point on it here. And when the believers are going to talk to each other about the struggles that they had in this dunya and how they reached the point that they are in right now, they're gonna give basically the credit for them following Allah and not listening to the disbelievers. They're gonna give all of that credit to Allah. That basically, if it wasn't for Allah, if it wasn't for my faith in Allah, I would have listened to that person and I would have been punished with him right now for listening to him. He would have been punished for convincing me, and I would have been punished for listening to him in the first place. They're gonna give all the credit and of how they're not in hellfire right now and why they are in heaven right now. They're going to give all that credit to Allah, because Allah is the one that helped them along the way in the world to ignore what others talk about them or say about them and what others do to them in order for them to reach that point that they are in right now in heaven. They give all that credit to Allah. In the Quran, the story just ends on about here. The Quran uses both contexts or both stories to basically tell the believer, hold on to your beliefs. Remain having faith in Allah. And it's telling the disbelievers, quit trying to convince people to not believe in Allah. Quit trying to make it tougher for people to actually believe in Allah and exercise their belief. Because in both situations, at the end, you're going to be punished, you're going to be regretting for convincing them, and they're going to regret listening to you in the first place. And on the other side, in heaven, it's going to convince the believers to believe in Allah even more. In both contexts, this is the end. It is used as a warning for disbelievers and believers, telling them exactly what they should do in this book.